Today in this live we are going to be addressing the world's most corrupt media, the anti-Hindu deep state operatives of the times now. Times now, the world's most corrupt and the anti-Hindu deep state elements. Before we address your systematic hate speech campaign that is masked as journalism, we are going to crack down on some of the fundamental questions that is there. You being the world's most corrupt media and the anti-Hindu deep state media that is there, let us look at the fundamentals. I have one of the basic questions that are there for you. Point number one, who authorized your global jurisdiction? Who gave you the authority to interfere in a legitimate diplomatic relations that is established between the Hindu diaspora in the United States of America and the sovereign indigenous nations which are there in Bolivia? That is the first and foremost. What gives you the global jurisdiction? You are based in India, and the relationship that is being established, the diplomatic relations that are being established are between a US organization and a Bolivian nation. What have you got to do in this? That's point number one that we need to understand. You times now is the worst and the most corrupt media because you seem to be having another agenda completely. Point number two, the next question that I want to have from you answered is that why are you involving the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism when he is not even a signatory? He has not signed any of the agreements with the Bolivian indigenous communities and the Bolivian indigenous people. He has not been involved in any way. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has got nothing to do. He is not in the US organization. He is not part of the US organization. Then what has the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism got to do with this entire treaty? With this entire agreement that is there? Why are you involving the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism when he has got absolutely nothing to do with the entire agreement? Once again, this agreement was signed between the US Hindus, the Hindu diaspora in the United States and the Bolivian indigenous nations. Why such a deliberate misattribution? Why are you spreading so much of hate speech? Why are you trying to create lawfare when you have got nothing to do with the jurisdiction? And point number one. And second, when you know the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has got nothing to do, did you read the agreements? Did you see the agreements? Did the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism sign? The agreements are out there for public transparency. Did you see the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism sign? No. Then why are you involving the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism when he is not even a signatory? That's point number two that you need to answer. Let's hit at point number three. Why are you trying to launch and why are you launching the genocidal attacks against the Hindu minorities? You need to be very clear. What statement that you are trying to make is that the Hindu diaspora should not exist. The Hindu diaspora of Kailasa should not exist. This is nothing but a genocidal attempt on the entire Hindu diaspora out there, because everyone who follows Kailasa, all the Hindus, the Hindu diaspora to which Kailasa serves day and night, you are trying to make a statement that anybody who is there in Kailasa, anybody who tries to associate themselves with Kailasa needs to be targeted and needs to be eliminated, needs to be terminated. That is exactly what you're telling. Who gave you the rights and why are you causing these genocidal attacks against the entire Hindu minorities which are there? Because you know, whether it's in the US or in the Canada, Hindus are one of the minorities which are there, and at the same time we contribute back so much to them. Knowing this, what is your intent? What is your motive? You have been a very systematic targeter of the minority communities, whether it is of the Hindus or the indigenous people who are there in Bolivia? This is the third fundamental question that you need to answer. Why are you so bent upon at creating a genocide against the entire Hindu diaspora which is there? Fourth, why the deliberate conflation of the separate legal entities? As mentioned earlier, the agreements are signed by the US Hindu organizations that are legally distinct from the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, but you try to deliberately twist, misrepresent and promote so much of hate speech and slander that you try to cause so much of confusion through your malicious intent. And your malicious intent is so deliberately seen through the whole thing. When the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has got nothing to do, what is being signed is between the Hindu diaspora who have given their life, who have worked day and night. And they have come together forming the organization in the US so that we can support the indigenous people and the indigenous community in Bolivia. Why does that burn you so much? You being an anti-Hindu deep state media, the world's most corrupt media times now, have been deliberately involved in genocidal attacks against the entire Hindu community, the already marginalized minority communities of Hindus. Looking at the next question, who funds your Times Now's anti-Hindu perception campaigns, anti-Hindu hate speech campaigns, anti-Hindu genocidal campaigns? Who funds these things to you? Which elements of the anti-Hindu deep state are financing your systematic attacks on the persecuted Hindu communities? US broadcast titled Nithyananda's biggest lamb scam, and this is nothing but pure hate speech. This systematically misrepresents the sovereign nation of Kailasa and the sovereignty that is vested in the Bolivian indigenous nations and the diplomatic efforts and our humanitarian mission. This is not defamation. This is persecution. This is lawfare. This is slander. This is incitement to genocide against the persecuted Hindu communities and against the entire indigenous communities who are there. The anti-Hindu deep state media, world's most corrupt media, Times Now, you need to answer to these fundamental questions before even we get started with anything else. You are neither a Bolivian media nor a US based media. The agreements that have been signed, the humanitarian cooperation agreements that have been signed, is between a US based entity, US based NGO, which is there to provide services, and a Bolivian indigenous nation. And they have the rights to enter into these relations as per their very constitution. And you are continuously trying to bring in and misrepresent, trying to show the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is involved in it when he is not. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is neither a signatory, nor is he part of the organization, nor has he got to do any of this. Then why drag the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism into this? And what you are doing and the attack that you have been deliberately trying to cause, your genocidal effort under the entire Hindu minority out there is very evident. Why? Why all this? All the viewers who are watching us live, I want every one of you to just think through on this a couple of minutes and post your opinions. Why do you think the world's most corrupt media, the anti-Hindu deep state elements such as Times Now, is trying to cause this deliberate misinformation, hate speech campaign against Kailasa, against the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, and deliberately against the indigenous minority communities around the world? What is it that they are trying to make a statement? That the Hindu diaspora has to be erased, that Hinduism has to be erased. This is the statement that we are looking at. Your genocidal anti-Hindu campaign that you have been continuously disguising as journalism, the most horrifying aspect of Times Now's reporting is that while you claim to defend the indigenous communities, you Hindu hating persecutors are explicitly arguing that indigenous rights should be denied to the entire global Hindu diaspora. This is not just colonial, it is genocidal. Let me strip it down for you. You are telling very clearly, time and again, by trying to attack something that's got no relevancy to you, by making this entire mafia gang of yours report on something that does not exist or does not make any difference to you, you have been actively perpetrating the anti-Hindu narratives. You have been perpetrating the genocide of the Hindu community, the Hindu persecuted community, the Hindu minority community, the Hindu indigenous community, and you have been explicitly, actively voicing your violence, voicing your agenda, your hate speech, your slander, and persecuting the Hindus in the entire world. Denying the indigenous rights to the Hindu nation is the worst and the most extreme form of persecution, because as Hindus, we have gone through centuries and centuries of oppression and suppression, genocide. And though the world today is a democratic world, though the world today does not have any enforced labor, at least in the so-called developed countries, that doesn't exist. The nation that you are in, it supposedly does not exist and gives the right to freedom. But what you are trying to do is denying the right of the Hindus, the global Hindu diaspora. This is nothing short of persecution. Your malicious ideas, your malicious intent is very, very evident, because the campaign that you are promoting very clearly focuses on delegitimizing the constitutional right that the indigenous Hindu nations have to engage in diplomatic relations with various different entities. And this is a right that is protected under Article 3 of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of the Indigenous People, the UNDRIP. When this is protected by the international laws, by the international personalities, what gives you the right to attack the indigenous Hindus around the entire world? This shocking fact reveals your true agenda, the mask that you're wearing, where you try to project yourself as somebody who tries to save and protect the indigenous communities. Rather, what you are really and truly doing is perpetrating the genocidal mechanism that denies Hindu nations and the Hindu diaspora, the Hindu minority community, their rightful place in the international community. By attacking these agreements, you are basically making a statement to all the Hindu diaspora that you have no right to exist. Let me repeat that again. By attacking these agreements that have been entered into by the US, the global Hindu diaspora, by the US organizations and the Bolivian indigenous nations, you are making a statement that you Hindus have no right to exist. What gives you the right to do this? What gives you the authority to do this? Who is the colonial ideology? Who are the colonial goons who are backing up this narrative that you have been actively trying to perpetrate? The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is not involved. KAILASA is not involved in this. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is not a signatory in any of the agreements. It is the hard work done by the global Hindu diaspora in the US, in the Canada. They enter an agreement into the cooperation agreement with the Bolivian indigenous nations, and you try to spread hate speech on the name of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. Why? What's your agenda? What's your true intent? You are making a very, very clear statement that Hindus have no right to exist. This is causing a genocide. And I want you to be very clear that the entire international community, the entire United Nations and the international community out there is watching and keeping a track of all of this. Let's look at the examples. I'm actually speaking facts over here. Why don't every one of you guys go to transparency.org, and there you can see the world's most corrupt index. And Times Now, you are at one of the worst out there. Out of 180, you overrank over 100. The truth that you carry is absolutely null and void, because all that you have been actively trying to do, actively perpetrating, is genocide against the entire Hindus. And you do not want the Hindus to succeed. You want the Hindus to get destroyed. What you have been doing is a very systematic violation that is continuously, time and again, inciting violence against the Hindus. And this has been there historically through all your narratives that you have been falsely trying to propose, that you have been falsely trying to allege in your videos. Times now, the deep state of the anti-Hindu media, the anti-Hindu deep state media, times now the world's most corrupt media, you have to answer. You are an instrument of the anti-Hindu deep state, and you have basically, literally, quite literally, made a joke of all the journalistic ethics based on which any media source, any journalist is supposed to adhere. Not just that you have made a joke, you have deliberately caused the misrepresentation, and you are actively working towards the Hindu genocide. When we look at your genocidal intent, it's very clear, because you are so dehumanizing the way that you portray the Hindu communities as fictitious, as fraudulent, using the very same rhetorical patterns historically that has been employed to justify the mass violence against the minorities. So by doing this, what are you trying to do? This is, calling a dog mad and then making the mob lynch it and kill it. What you are doing exactly is the same. By calling the global Hindu diaspora, who very really exist, by calling them fictitious, by calling them fraudulent, you have been spreading a very clear anti-Hindu narrative, anti-Hindu hate speech, a genocidal intent. This is very evident, and you have been doing that very systematically, time and again, narrating it. In just a matter of 24 hours, you have released over 6 videos through which you have been dehumanizing and causing a deliberate, active, perpetrated narrative built against the global Hindu diaspora by calling the global Hindu diaspora fictitious and fraudulent. And you have been continuously working towards this, because you know how this works. Because once you create a genocidal intent by trying to justify the violence against these global Hindu diaspora against us, you know very clearly what was the next steps in that. Next would be mob incitement, where your inflammatory language is designed to provoke the violence and the ignorance in the mass, and to take action against the Hindu communities this is actually very a deliberate following of the historical patterns. Not just in the last, I'm not speaking about a centuries away, I'm even speaking about just the last decade. The way that you have been doing this very systematically is broken down, and to the entire world it's very clear. You first portray that the Hindus and the global Hindus are fraudulent, are fictitious, whereas you deep state media try to predate and try to attack, spread genocide, create genocide on the global Hindus. Next, by creating and using the inflammatory languages such as you, trying to provoke the violence, you next justify why the attack has to be done on the global Hindus. Global Hindus are one of the most contributing to the entire society wherever they reside. And third, you have been trying to deliberately falsify everything that is there. You have systematically fabricated the connections between the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism and the agreements to which he is not a party. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, I want to repeat time and again, has got absolutely nothing to do with the entire agreement that was signed between a United States of America, an organization from the US, and a Bolivian indigenous nation. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has got nothing to do with it, but you have systematically fabricated these lies, trying to connect the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, trying to pull the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism into these agreements to which he is not a party in any which way. So you have been using all your colonial mindset tactics just to persecute the Hindu minorities more and more. And what you're causing is a very deliberate religious persecution, because you specifically target the Hindu religious expressions while protecting various other faiths from similar scrutiny. And you have a historical record of this. Your entire record spans and is deliberately used just for attacking the Hindu faith. You, Times Now, are an anti-Hindu deep state element. You are the world's most corrupt media. You are a persecutor. You are a colonizer who continues to use these cheap, dirty tactics, trying to garner the mob, trying to incite hate, trying to persecute the already marginalized Hindu community, the already persecuted Hindu communities. And over all of these things, you have been actively denying the Hindu agency. You try to show as if we Hindus are incapable of legitimate international relations, perpetuating colonial stereotypes. What makes you think that we as Hindus don't have the brain to enter into right agreements and that we do not know? What gives you the right to say the entire global Hindu diaspora are incapable, are illegitimate? You have been doing nothing but perpetrating these colonial stereotypes. Your failure to contact the US Hindu representatives for a comment before you broadcasted and have been actively spreading this hate speech demonstrates your deliberate intent to incite violence against our entire community. You neither know who is part of the organization, you have not even taken interest to open the agreement that you supposedly have seen, that you supposedly have been trying to say that Kailasa has gotten into a fictitious agreement, whereas Kailasa is neither an entity. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has got nothing to do with the US organization. It is formed by a group of US Hindu representatives. You have neither reached out to them, nor have you verified the facts before you systematically and deliberately work on these hate speech campaigns that has been targeted against the Hindu minorities, against the indigenous minorities, and against the indigenous people around the entire world. Anti-Hindu media, Times Now, you have a lot to explain. We request all the viewers to stay tuned as we come back to see and expose the dark truth of the anti-Hindu media such as Times Now. Let me address the anti-Hindu media, Times Now's systematic hate speech campaigns and the allegations that are put forth by this criminal gangsters media mafia. The first allegation that the anti-Hindu deep state media, Times Now, is trying to make is that the most bizarre and audacious scam of the decade. This inflammatory characterization by you, Hindu hating persecutors, it actually directly constitutes of hate speech and incitement to violence. First and foremost, what has been entered into is the legitimate diplomatic relations between the US Hindus and the indigenous nations. These are legitimate diplomatic arrangements where we exercise, the US Hindus and the global Hindu diaspora, all of us execute and exercise the constitutional rights to self-determination. This is not scam in any sense. What is scam is rather what you have been doing, trying to cheat the viewers, trying to cheat the people in your nation. So what you have been doing rather is using the word scam for what you are doing, but instead putting it on us, the global Hindu diaspora. Times Now, you media mafia, you fraud gangs have been deliberately trying to use inflammatory language to incite the mob violence rather than reporting any facts based on any evidences that is there. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, as I mentioned earlier, is not a signatory to any of these agreements. A fundamental fact that you deliberately try not just to hide but to misrepresent and time and again publish it to the entire world, trying to use the narratives that are there to build your anti-Hindu agenda more and more. The Bolivian constitution it very clearly protects the indigenous self-determination. Article 30, section 2.4, it says very clearly, in the Bolivian constitution, it explicitly guarantees the indigenous people the right to self-determination and their own territory. Article 32.5 ensures their right to maintain their own institutions. Article 403.1 states that the integrity of the indigenous territory is recognized, which is the right to maintain and develop their own forms of economic, cultural and spiritual life. Why does times now the anti-Hindu media, why do you fellows believe that these constitutional rights apply to everyone except for Hindus? There are multi-billion dollar giants, corporate companies who go and who do all kinds of illegal mining, so much of agricultural exploit, but I don't see that you have brought up any of that to light. Why is it that only Hindus are being targeted? Why does your entire false narrative target just the global Hindu diaspora? There is so many atrocities. Let's even say that you are out of your own so much of concern about the indigenous communities out there and really want to go there and help them. Why? There are thousands of other issues that have been going on throughout the entire decade. There are so many UN reports that are there. There are so many international organizations, international watchdogs and intergovernmental organizations that have been publishing reports about how the indigenous communities are being crashed and how they are being persecuted by the various deep states out there, by the various corporate goons who are there exploiting their land, exploiting their resources, whether it is mining, illegal agriculture, illegal deforestation. So many issues are happening, but I don't see you, the colonial mindset, the colonial predator times now, the anti-Hindu media times now, focusing on any of this even for a bit. Leave apart the fact that Bolivia and the indigenous nations are half the world apart from where you are. It's neither your jurisdiction, nor do you have any real belief in what you have been doing, and you don't have any actual interest or agenda to support the indigenous communities in the Bolivia. When that is not the intent, what else? It's very clear what you have been perpetrating is very clear anti-Hindu hate speech, anti-Hindu slander, and what you have been doing is causing a genocide, creating a genocide, trying to pave the path for the genocide of the global Hindu diaspora. What gives you the right to do this? What makes you think that you can go on perpetrating hate and crime against the Hindu diaspora? It does not give you the authority, whoever you may be, to attack the Hindu diaspora, the global Hindu diaspora. Same way, the Article 36 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous People, it very specifically ensures that the indigenous people have the right to maintain and develop contracts. They have the right to maintain relationships. They have the right to maintain cooperation with their own members as well as other people across the border. Kailasa and the Hindus, as indigenous people, we are entering into relationship with them. The US global Hindus, which is an indigenous group of community members, are entering into a relationship with the indigenous nation in the Bolivian nation. What hurts you? What has it got to do with you? How is this a scam? The indigenous people, we are cooperating and we are entering into agreements, humanitarian agreements with our brothers and sisters. We are not colonial deep state media like you. So why do you think you can interfere in our internal affairs? Neither this is your jurisdiction, nor are you a member of our community. You've got nothing to do with this. By characterizing the legitimate diplomatic relations as a scam, you are directly engaging in persecution of the indigenous rights that directly violates the Article 36 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous People. By you are focusing a targeted malicious campaign against the indigenous communities around the world. This is very evident. And all the viewers, I'm putting forth this as a question for every one of you. You guys decide. What I'm presenting to every one of you is not my opinions but my fact. You all can look at it and you can decide what is right, what is wrong, who is telling the facts and who is lying. If the real agenda of the anti-Hindu deep state media Times Now was to support and to protect the indigenous communities out there, then surely this is not the way, because all that is being done here is just inciting hate against the global Hindu diaspora. What Kailasa has done is conservation partnerships. What the global Hindu diaspora, the US based organizations, have done is conservation partnership, not land grabs. The agreements that the global Hindu diaspora, the US based organization, the indigenous members have done is a partnership with clear benefits for the indigenous communities. We believe in harmony with the nature. We believe in protecting the nature. The Hindus by far are the world's most non-violent community, and our stats prove this for every one of you. So when we are working towards a better planet, when we are working towards contributing to the society, when we are working actively towards preserving the ancient heritage and culture, what gives you the rights to poke your nose in between and try to exploit? All the agreements that the global Hindu diaspora, the US based organization, has signed with the Bolivian indigenous nation has a very explicit provision. It says where payment is effectuated after the ratification by the competent authorities, and this ensures full compliance with the Bolivian law. It's got nothing to do with trying to impede their sovereignty or their sovereign rights, but you anti-Hindu deep state media mafia Times Now have been deliberately withholding all of this crucial information and creating false impressions of illegality. But the joke's on you, because the world's watching. And this is not for me to say. Why don't you go and look at the comments under your videos? You have been making a fool of yourself. The people who have been coming and looking at your video are very clear about how does it even matter to you? The very nation that you are in is going through so many issues. The very nation where you try to operate from is having so many problems. Whether the indigenous in your nation, whether the tribes in your nation are having so many issues that are there. There are basic necessities which are missing. There are temples, there are so many other things that are being raised to the ground by various other faiths. What makes it so interested? Why are you so interested going halfway across the world and trying to perpetrate so much of false narratives and hate against the Hindu communities and the indigenous communities? This shows your true intent, the dark side, the dark phase of the anti-Hindu deep state media Times Now. We are going to be coming back right now with furthermore evidences and facts where we understand very clearly how Times Now has been deliberately attacking and spreading the genocidal agendas against the Hindus and the indigenous communities around the world. This is not just an attack on Kailasa. This is not just an attack on the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. This is a targeted attack on the entire global Hindu diaspora to cause genocide of the global Hindu diaspora. Let's come back and look at a larger picture of the same. I want to really open up and share with every one of you here is how the facts are being twisted. Let us look at what actually transpired. There are two different aspects to this. One is Kailasa and the SPH, and second is the US based organization that has entered into agreements. Now, Kailasa as the sovereign state, as an indigenous nation representing the 2 billion Hindu diaspora, the born and practicing Hindus around the world, Kailasa representing the 10,000 plus indigenous Hindu communities, Kailasa is a sovereign independent nation with our own multiple sovereign territories. So Kailasa has established diplomatic relations with various countries around the world, with various indigenous nations around the world, including in Bolivia and in various continents, I would say, whether it is the South American continent, whether it's the North American continent, in the African continent, in the Asian continent, the Oceanian, in the Caribbean. So all across the world, Kailasa as a sovereign nation has signed diplomatic relations between two different states, within two different entities. Now this is Kailasa and the cooperation between Kailasa and the various different nations that are there. Now let us look on the other part of it, which is a US based organization that has signed a cooperation agreement with a Bolivian indigenous organization and a Bolivian indigenous nation. Now both of these are two different facts, but you times now anti-Hindu media mafia, the deep state media, are trying to club both of these together and trying to show they are one and the same. As a matter of fact, even the agreement that you have allegedly dug and discovered, which is actually already a publicly recorded document, it is protocolized, it is notarized, it's a publicly available document, which you try to show that you have gotten hold of a closed agreement or a closed scam document that is there. It's a very open public document. But the fact here is that this is an agreement that has been signed by the US entity, the US organization, and the Bolivian nation. This is not the same that was signed by KAILASA with the various indigenous nations. Why don't you open the document that you have and why don't you read it? It is very clear that the agreement is between the indigenous nation and the US entity. You have been trying to club both of these, trying to say that KAILASA has entered into these fictitious deals. KAILASA has been entering into these deals and scamming the indigenous communities. But I want to make it very clear. KAILASA, yes, KAILASA has entered into various diplomatic relations with various countries around the world, including with over 150 indigenous nations. But that is not what you have. You have absolutely no idea what that even means, because KAILASA today, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, has already established the United Ancient Nations, which is similar to the United Nations for the modern nations. The United Ancient Nations, the goal is to further the rights and the sovereignty that is vested in these various indigenous nations, First Nations, Ancient Nations, protecting their heritage, protecting their rights, and giving them the rights and voice on the global international community. That is what KAILASA has been doing through the United Ancient Nations, and over 150 countries are already a part of this. Over 150 indigenous and First Nations are already a part of this. But that is not the agreement that you have in your hand. What you purportedly allegedly allege that we have dug up and it has come to our hands, the evidences that KAILASA has signed and accused, and they have duped the indigenous communities out there. Why don't you look at the facts? What KAILASA has entered with the various different countries is different versus what the US based entity has entered with the indigenous communities out there. Seeing the hard work and the efforts and the sacrifice that the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has done, and going through the very grassroots levels, supporting the indigenous communities, voicing out their rights, these Hindu diaspora, the indigenous Hindu diaspora in the United States, following suit of KAILASA, following the lead of KAILASA, have entered into independent agreements with these indigenous nations in Bolivia. These are two different things. These are not the same. KAILASA has entered and you have absolutely no idea what that is. And then being inspired by KAILASA, these US indigenous nations, indigenous communities, indigenous Hindu communities, indigenous global Hindu diaspora, they actually entered into a relationship with the Bolivian indigenous nations. This is different. This is different. They are seeing the hard work and effort that KAILASA has put in. Being inspired by that, they enter into these agreements. Being inspired by what the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has contributed. Now, why does it become so difficult for you to just accept the fact as is? For you to just go over the actual publicly available record document that is there and seeing the facts for yourself? Why are you perpetrating hate? Why are you instigating the mob? Why are you spreading hate speech? Why are you twisting the facts, trying to show about the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, trying to bring in KAILASA, whereas the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has got absolutely nothing to do with that US based organization that is there? No, he is neither a signatory, he is neither part of the organization, neither was he there at the point when the signing happened. then what makes you bring in and try to falsely claim that this is an allegation on the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism? It very clearly describes your malicious intent. You anti-Hindu deep state media Times Now, you frauds and criminals are very clear, and you have been actively perpetrating hate against the already marginalized minority Hindu communities, minority Hindu traditions. Whenever they try to enter into these agreements, cooperation agreements, you have been trying to attack them. And what is your true intent? What do you get by attacking the entire global Hindus? You go on to claim telling that 3 indigenous tribes were duped and conned into signing land leases with a non-existent country. I want to make it clear over here that this in itself is a false claim. You do not have any evidences for this. You do not have any proofs for this. You have absolutely nothing. And this allegation very clearly reveals your genocidal, the Times Now, your genocidal colonial mindset. You suggest that all the Hindu diaspora across the entire world have no right to exist. That is what you're trying to make a statement by making these claims. The anti-indigenous Times Now colonial denial of all the Hindu diaspora's agency. We as Hindus, the global Hindu diaspora, have our own rights. You go on to claim that the indigenous leaders were duped. This is just profoundly racist, and you deny the intelligence and their agency of the indigenous communities who are there as per their country's constitution, which you don't care about, which you're not interested in, which is irrelevant to you. As per their very constitution, they have been given the agency, they have been given the sovereign rights, they have been given the autonomy by their state, by their country. How and who are you to deny that? If you think that the indigenous people are dumb and they can be duped, do you think their nation, which understands and gives them their right, would have done it? They are an indigenous nation, and the plurinational state of Bolivia is very clear that it is built by the building blocks of these various indigenous nations. So you have no authority to interfere into any of their decisions. Who are you to make a statement that they are duped? This is directly challenging their intelligence and their agency. So not only are you perpetrating hate against the Hindu community, you are actively perpetrating the indigenous nation's violence. You are actively inciting genocide against the indigenous communities, the already marginalized and attacked and persecuted indigenous communities. This colonial mindset portrays indigenous leaders as incapable for making informed decisions. And all the negotiations, you need to know, were conducted transparently with full disclosure and the community witnesses by the US-based organization which is there. That is the reason these are public documents, these are publicly notarized, these are apostilled, these are protocolized and publicly available with the entire consent of the community. Did you reach out to any of the community members out there? Did you have an interview with any of them trying to understand what exactly happened there? Did you study the Bolivian laws? Do you know the problems that the indigenous people are facing? Have you ever in your history voiced for any of this? Then why this alleged false narratives trying to say that Kailasa has duped? First of all, Kailasa is not involved. Second, you are trying to perpetrate active hate against the Hindu global diaspora, the Hindu minority community that is there. And third, you have been actively attacking the global indigenous rights. You have been attacking the indigenous leaders by claiming that they do not have the brain or they do not have the intelligence to negotiate deals and to know what is right for them, what is best for them. Who are you? You are a racist, colonial, media mafia, anti-indigenous media. You are not just anti-Hindu, you are anti-indigenous, because you are a colonial predator that is working towards actively attacking the indigenous communities around the world and trying to erase the Hindus across the entire planet, creating a genocide and targeted hate campaign against the Hindus. Your fraudulent claims, you in your own broadcast inadvertently, it shows the representatives in dialogue with the indigenous communities. If you feel that the US based Hindu organization went and duped them, do you think that they're going to be having a dialogue with the indigenous communities, serving the indigenous communities, whether it's serving food, whether it is teaching them yoga, whether it is helping them in their education, providing them with free food, providing them with health care? Do you think all of these things are going to happen under the dark? No, it's happening in the broad daylight and it's being offered to these indigenous communities. Then where is the question of being duped? You fraudulent media Times Now has just been trying to perpetrate hate against the global Hindu diaspora, trying to create a genocide against the entire global Hindu diaspora. In the footage that you have shown in your own videos, you can see that the indigenous leaders have been engaging in a very respectful dialogue with the US Hindu representatives. It's very clear and it is very straightforward, and this is there in your own thing. We are not holding somebody at the gunpoint. The indigenous communities are not being held at gunpoint to ask them to sign. Why? There are so many other things that are happening in your own nation, in your own country. How come those are not making headlines in yours and you deliberately go all the way across the planet Earth and portray false information? This very clearly shows your narrative. The anti-Hindu deep state media Times Now, deliberately you have been editing, mistranslating, misrepresenting these exchanges to fabricate a conflict. You once again are trying to create the narrative. You once again have been perpetrating the narrative that Hindus have no right to their autonomy. Hindus have no right to exist. Hindus have no right to live peacefully. Hindus have no right to contribute to the people. This is what you have been telling. And as you may not care or as you may not even understand, many of these indigenous Bolivian communities have a close ties with the indigenous spiritual traditions of Hinduism. A lot of these things are directly in perspective. In the Hindu tradition, in our tradition, we call the Mother Earth as Pachayamman. In their Bolivian, in the indigenous communities, they call Mother Earth as Pachamama. This is just one of that, where very clearly and very evidently our both ideologies match and they overlap. They are beautifully coexist. We have shared values of reverence for nature. We have shared values for reverence for cosmic harmony, spiritual connection to the land. We do not exploit the resources. Hindus in the entire tradition, Hindus statistically speaking throughout the entire history have only been contributing because of the fundamental ideas that are inlaid into Hindus. As young children, we are taught all of these principles. Same goes with these indigenous communities in Bolivia. They are the defenders of the Amazonian forest. They are having the rights. They manage the vast lands of these Amazonian forests, providing and protecting the culture and heritage and ancient biodiversity that is there. If it was left into the hands of colonial extremists such as you, Times Now, long back the entire forest would have been razed to the ground, and by now you would have used and plundered the resources out there and falsely accused the indigenous people for the same. That's exactly what you're doing. The US organizations, as extensions of the 5,000-year-old Hindu indigenous traditions, as the extensions of Kailasa, being inspired by Kailasa, they have a very deep cultural connection with these indigenous communities, not just in Bolivia, but the entire world. So what the US based organization, the Global Hindu Diaspora, has been doing is entering into these partnership agreements that are actively working towards supporting, protecting, preserving these indigenous faiths and tradition. But you have been deliberately misrepresenting, spinning false narratives against the indigenous. What you are causing is a genocide against Hindus, a genocide against the indigenous communities around the world. You have a lot to answer. Anti-Hindu media, deep state media, Times Now, you have a lot to answer. We request all the viewers who are there watching us live, post your opinions on the chat. We are going to be coming right back and listening to every one of you. What do you guys think of what's going on here? Hindu deep states mouthpiece, you criminal fraud, Times Now. I have a question for every one of you guys. you guys go on to try and claim that you have been exposing the scams, right? Whereas when you look at the fundamental facts that are there has no relationship. By now it's clearly established that Kailasa or the SPH are in no way directly related to the agreement that has been signed. It is the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has not signed the agreement. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is not part of the entity, the organization that has signed the agreement. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism was not there when the agreement was signed or when the deal was negotiated. There has been nothing to do with the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. But your false narrative and targeted attack on Kailasa and trying to delegitimize has utterly failed. And that's what we are clearly understanding by this. Kailasa, as the representative of the 2 billion born and practicing Hindus and the representative of over 10,000 indigenous traditions of the Hinduism, Kailasa stands as a voice for everyone. Same way, Kailasa as the head spearheading the United Ancient Nations also is the voice for these indigenous nations around the world. As mentioned earlier, over 150 nations, 150 ancient nations, First Nations, indigenous nations and kingdoms are already part of the United Ancient Nations. As a representative of all of these indigenous nations and the Hindu community, the Hindu diaspora and Hinduism across the world, Kailasa is a voice for all of them, for the entire of the Hindu and the indigenous community across the entire globe. So we are voicing our rights. But by you trying to misrepresent this entire information, trying to say that the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is got to do anything and trying to blatantly attack and abuse the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, trying to falsify and villain the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, you are perpetrating a genocidal attack on the entire Hindus around the world. Because the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has got nothing to do, then why drag him into this? Kailasa has not signed the agreement that you are trying to characterize, that you have been trying to perpetrate through your false lies. Then why bring Kailasa into this? We are speaking for the rights of the entire Hindus and the indigenous out there. But what gives you the right to falsely misrepresent all of this data? The characterization of the anti-Hindu deep state media times now, you Hindu hating persecutors, you fundamentally misrepresent the nature of these agreements and you suggest that the entire Hindu diaspora has no rights to engage in these conservation efforts. As I mentioned, it is the US Hindus who have entered into these conservation efforts. You go on to say that attempting to lease 3,900 square kilometers of land for 1,000 years for a paltry sum of over $1 lakh. Now come on. This is the investment and this is the commitment of those US organizations, by those US Hindus who are inspired by the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, who are inspired by Kailasa for the sacrifice that the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has done just to contribute to the entire world. Same way, they are ready to sacrifice all their hard-earned wealth to serving the community. And as a matter of fact, in every way, all these preservation agreements, cooperation agreements are done for hundreds if not thousands of years. That is how exactly it is done. They are perpetual agreements because the defending needs to happen perpetually. Otherwise, you colonial races will try to attack and destroy the planet Earth today. You will wipe out the entire indigenous nations, you will wipe out the entire Hindu communities and then try to blame them for the destruction that has been caused. So all of these agreements that have been entered by these US Hindus are either 1,000 years or perpetual, which shows their commitment and their willingness and their commitment and integrity to invest into these protection agencies, to invest into these cooperation agreements to protect those Hindu communities, to protect those indigenous communities, to protect the entire environment. What we are doing is conservation partnerships. What Kailasa inspires, what Kailasa stands for is conservation partnerships, not land appropriation. The time frame that these indigenous nations have signed along with the US Hindus, the organization, reflects the long-term commitment that is needed for the effective environmental stewardship. These long-term conservation agreements are what is practiced as a global standard. All the agreements that are contained are very clear and they respect the Bolivian laws. Again, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is not a signatory to any of these agreements. Then why this deliberate misattribution to the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism? Why so much of attack? Why so much of hate speech? Why so much of slander on Kailasa and the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, when the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism legally is in no way responsible or no way involved in any of these agreements? What you have been trying to project is a deliberate hate speech and genocidal attempt against the entire Hindu and the indigenous community around the world. Article 403, point number 1 of the Bolivian Constitution, as mentioned earlier, states the integrity of the indigenous territory is recognized with their rights to maintain and develop their own forms of economic, cultural and spiritual life. This is as per their very constitution. So all these resources that are managed by the communities themselves through their traditional governance, they have the right, and historically speaking, we can see that as a matter of fact from various UN reports that it is only because the indigenous are protecting their land, their community, they are protecting these Amazon forests at the cost of their life. We need to understand this very clearly. There are multiple things that are common between the indigenous Hindu communities and the indigenous Bolivian communities that are there. And one of the commonalities is this, where Hindus gave up their entire life trying to protect our tradition. We gave up our life, our ancestors gave up our life just for protecting Hinduism. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has faced over 70 plus assassination attempts just for standing up for Hinduism, just to protect our ancient heritage. And you media mafia, you anti-Hindu deep state elements, you anti-Hindu deep state elements mouthpiece times now have been deliberately attacking. But despite that, we stand strong. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has endured all of these attacks but continues to serve the Hindu community, continues to protect the Hindu community, continues to be the voice of the dispossessed Hindus across the entire world. Same goes with those indigenous communities as well. In Bolivia, they have been targeted and persecuted continuously throughout the entire history, into inadvertent labor, into forced labor, into persecution, malpractice, rape, into all of this kind of physical and mental abuse. Despite all of that, statistics shows very clearly that they are the reason the Amazon lives on today. They are the reason that today the world exists to the state it is, because the Amazon forests contribute to a large amount of what we live today, taking on the global carbon emissions which are there. If not, by now you would have fried yourself in a pan of hot the entire globe warming. So these Amazonian indigenous communities are actually defenders of the community. Just like how we Hindus have given up our life to protect Hinduism, to protect our ancient heritage, same way they have given their life to protect and preserve these indigenous nations, these indigenous communities and the entire Amazonian forest and the culture and heritage that lives on today. And you go on to go and attack those indigenous communities, you go on to attack the Hindus who have given up their life due to you colonial oppressors, you colonial racist media mafia who have been suppressing and attacking and persecuting the entire Hindu indigenous and the Bolivian indigenous communities. The economic components that are there in these agreements that have been signed are not payments for lands. They are investments into community development and environmental protection. That is how it happens. You falsely misrepresent that as bribe, you falsely misrepresent that as payments for land and that duping them. What gives you the authority to do this? You have got nothing to do with this. What gives you the authority to misrepresent? Why do you even care about what is going on the other part of the world? In your own country, people are there struggling for basic food. People are there who do not have health care, who do not have any basic necessities that are being covered. Even now, your nation stands as one of the countries that is least developed and partial. And as per the index, the World Corruption Index, why don't you go and look at your country's index? It stands at 98 out of 180. This proves very clearly that when there is a lot that has to be done in your own nation, you trying to slander the indigenous nations and the Hindu indigenous communities is very evident that you are just interested in maligning, in malicious hate speech against the indigenous and the global Hindu diaspora. It's very clear. You fraudulent media at times now, your fixation on these monetary amounts reveals a capitalistic framework that commodifies land. This is completely in contrary to the indigenous perspectives, and it suggests that the entire Hindu diaspora has no right to non-exploitative relationship, because you have been trying to claim that whatever the Hindu diaspora has been doing is exploitative relationships, but that is not the case here. The Hindu diaspora, the US Hindus, have entered into these agreements to support, to ground the entire indigenous communities who are there, to preserve their traditions, because we know the persecution that we have been through by colonial racists like you. So we want to make sure that we support them and we be a voice for them. Now what hurts you is because all your false narratives are being exposed. You are unable to bear with the success of the Hindus. You are unable to bear with the success of Kailasa, which is the first nation for Hindus. Kailasa is the homeland for all the 2 billion born and practicing Hindus around the world. Now that you are not able to agree. You deep state element, you deep state anti-Hindu mouthpiece, you are not able to do anything, and that burns you to the core. You are jealous. Why don't we take a different approach in this? Let's look at some of the stats of Kailasa. In Kailasa, which is the first nation for Hindus and the homeland for all the Hindus around the world, we have 100% food security, which means food is provided to every citizen of Kailasa absolutely free of cost. Second, we have 100% security and protection for shelter, which means Kailasa provides shelter for every citizen in Kailasa. Third, Kailasa provides 100% medical and health security, which means medical care in Kailasa is absolutely free. In Kailasa, there is no tax. So there is no exploitation in any way at all. Kailasa, there is absolutely no drug addicts. In Kailasa, in our sovereign nation in Kailasa, there is no drug abuse. There is no violence. There is no exploitation. Kailasa is a peaceful nation. Kailasa's success is burning you. That is the fact. Why don't you go and look at your own nation? Why don't you try and go fix these problems in your nation? And if you are not able to do it in the nation, why don't you guys go ahead and tell everyone to become a citizen of Kailasa? Kailasa is open for everyone. In fact, you can go over to ecitizen.info /Kailasa and you can register yourself to become a Kailasavasi, a citizen of Kailasa. Because if you in your nation cannot make these happen, rather than trying to sit and waste your time on the slander, hate speech and genocidal attacks, why don't you go fix the problems in your country? There is so much of poverty, the poverty line is below the average, and there is so much of medical issues that are going on, so many tribes are being marginalized, there is so much of racial partiality which is there is so much of religious persecution that goes on in your country. Why don't you turn your attention to all of those and fix those? Why are you so interested in Kailasa? Because you are unable to put up with the victory of Kailasa. You try to continuously deny about the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is not the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, but despite all your false claims, the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism today. Next, you try to go on to say that Kailasa does not exist. You try to say that Kailasa is a fictitious land, is a fictitious nation. It does not have land, it does not exist. It is an imagination. But yet now the truths are coming out in your own channel that even as per your misrepresentation that Kailasa has autonomous indigenous lands in various countries around the world. You go on to say that the indigenous nations, the United Ancient Nations does not exist. But once again, in contrary to that, through your false accusations, even through your own false accusations, you convey to the entire world that Kailasa has signed relationship with various indigenous nations. So every claim that Kailasa has had till now, you yourself have made it a reality. You yourself, in your false narrative, have made it clear that every single thing that Kailasa and the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism have claimed is real. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism is real. Kailasa is real with our own sovereign territory. Kailasa has entered into the relationship with various indigenous nations, thereby establishing the United Ancient Nations. The joke is on you, anti-Hindu deep state media times now. The joke is on you. Because by you trying to misrepresent the facts, you have actually given a lot of credibility to Kailasa. You, for all those people who did not believe when Kailasa and when we went on to say that Kailasa is a nation and Kailasa has been established, Kailasa has established United Ancient Nations, for those who do not believe, you have become a inadvertent mouthpiece to legitimize every one of these claims of Kailasa. That is a matter of fact. And this success is burning you and you can do nothing about it. It's an open challenge to times now. If you really have the guts, why don't you come on a live one-on-one interview with the representatives of Kailasa? If you have the guts, come over. We are ready for a live interview, but you are cowards. Because you know that you do not have any evidences, you know that everything that you have done is just false narratives and you do not have the spine. You just go on to exploit the vulnerable communities out there and prey on them. But Kailasa stands strong and the very same attacks that you have been doing on Kailasa is actually returned back to you in a way. Why don't you go and look at all the comments that are there under your videos? They suggest very clearly that they are in support of Kailasa and that you have been just cheap frauds. Your intent is exposed by your own followers. Take a few minutes to go over and look at it. Anti-Hindu deep state media times now, it's a sincere suggestion from my end that you stop wasting time in your deliberate assassination attempts, in your deliberate spreading of genocidal thought currents and narratives on the indigenous and Hindus around the world. We, Kailasa, we are not going to keep quiet. Your hate speech campaign against the Hindu communities, against the Hindu diaspora, under the garb of trying to expose is just scam and is just as negative and as perpetrating as the colonial era. It is the same. So my sincere suggestion would be that rather than you sit and waste time on all of those things trying to break the confidence of the Hindus or trying to attack, which you are utterly and bitterly failing, rather why don't you spend time trying to fix the problems in your own country? If you are a media with any ethics, if you are someone who even cares about the people around you or you care to true journalism, why don't you expose the issues and the problems in your country and make sure that those are fixed? If you are important to do that, then at least make sure that you are letting all your viewers know that they can all become citizens of Kailasa. They can register to become citizens of Kailasa at ecitizen.info/KailasaVasis. We have the link that is projected on the screen for every one of your viewers to come and take residence and to become the citizens of Kailasa. We have complete food security, we have complete health security, we have no taxes, we have complete educational security. All of these are provided free of cost. There is no religious persecution, there is no lawfare, there is absolute non-violence in the entire nation. We do not have racists like you. We do not have criminals and thugs in our nation. Our nation stands as a pinnacle, as every nation would be. So I welcome you and your entire viewers to take refuge in Kailasa. If you feel you are not able to handle the lawfare, if you feel you are not able to handle the persecution that is happening in your nation and you are not able to fix those problems, then at least come over to Kailasa and become citizens of Kailasa. So head over to kailasa.org and read about Kailasa. Head over to ecitizen.info/KailasaVasis and sign up to become an e-citizen and sign up to become a citizen of Kailasa. Stop with all your lies and try to do some real work in your life. With that, we'd like to thank all the viewers who have gathered us today, and we will be continuing to expose these anti-Hindu, anti-Hindu deep state elements such as Times Now, who are just the mouthpieces of these deep state elements, and how they have been trying all their efforts to perpetrate violence and genocide against the Hindus and the indigenous around the world. Once again, we'd like to thank all the viewers. Stay tuned, we'll be coming up with a lot more of these live videos and videos for every one of you to watch. Thank you all. Nithyanandam.